happy to bring on this next guest here, Tyler Kuehl. He writes for the Daily Face-Off and contributes to other outlets here that we'll have him plug at the end. But I'm going to throw him a little curve here. He's been on the show enough to know that we usually ask him the thing of the day or what have you. But I've missed that with the last couple, and it's a lot of baked goods here, Tyler. It's just cookies and brownies and cupcake was the thing of the day. But I'm going to throw you a curve because I noticed from looking at your acts, as I normally do before we have the interview, I studied kind of your articles and your X account. We have two wrestling fans in studio, and I noticed you were tweeting a lot about about John Cena's final match. So I wanted to open it up so that Big G and I can have a discussion with you on your thoughts on the final match, and I swear we'll cover some hockey too.
No, yeah, guys, it was, thanks for having me on again, Ryan. Good to hear from you guys. But the reason why it was such a big deal, I had a friend of mine come over and watch the match on Saturday night's main event, because for those that don't know, I wasn't born a wrestling fan. Like, I was born in the 90s, so you think, oh, the Attitude Era and everything, it'd be great. But I never became a real fan. But my dad got free tickets to a random SmackDown show in March of 2004. It was right after WrestleMania 20, and one of the guys that came out was John Cena. He was wearing a Magic Johnson Michigan State jersey, kind of repping the quote-unquote hometown feel, and I thought, man, this guy's really cool. He's coming out in basketball jerseys. This guy might be legit, and 21 years later, I've thought the same thing, so I got jacked up for his final match, and knowing that it no matter what was going to happen, it wasn't going to be like some 5-star, Matt Classic, but just the ending of it, it turned me the wrong way. My buddy and I, we were ready to have this emotional farewell, but we both sat there after the show with our head in our hands. We're like, that can't be it. That cannot be the final end to John Cena's 17-time champion career.
Well, Big G and I have covered some wrestling on the air, and so that's why we haven't done it this episode, but I saved it specifically because I saw that. I like to kind of look at kind of the deeper routes of booking and things in wrestling, because a lot of people can say, well, okay, so you're a hockey guy, you cover hockey. Well, it's not like the regular sports because it's booked, it's predetermined. But that's one of the things that's interesting to me, is that there's fan engagement that can potentially change the result of things. But in this case, they went with the very classic booking decision of the storied athlete going out on his back, giving the proverbial bump to the next guy coming up, and so then trying to raise that guy up the charts and then building him up to inevitably fall to somebody else, and that's kind of how the dominoes work of wrestling. But it was amazing to see how stunned that arena was, because I think a lot of people shared your belief that it should have gone differently. Did you have a scenario that you kind of wanted them to end with? Like, if you were kind of dream booking it, what would you have done with it?
As soon as Gunther won the last time is now tournament, my buddy and I were thinking, how can this possibly end? Because Gunther, for those that are wrestling fans, know that Gunther does not have a quote-unquote knockout finisher. His move is the sleeper, right? He puts guys to sleep and stuff. So it was like, are we really going to see John Cena tap? And I hadn't realized that until I mentioned on the show. He hadn't tapped since 2004. He hadn't gone to submission, and the way it ended with a slight smirk on his face, knowing that it was over, tapping out, and putting Gunther over. My thing is, it's funny because my buddy and I went to the last SmackDown show, Cena's last appearance in Grand Rapids earlier in the summer, and we're actually going to the SmackDown show next week at Van Andel Arena. And we went there knowing John Cena's a good guy, but at that point he was still doing his heel run, and we yelled at him and screamed at him and he's the bad guy, right? So we got into it, but we're for a guy that's done so much in his career, we just know now that if you're going to put Gunther over as the guy that forced John Cena to tap out in his last match, Gunther better go on a run of all runs of, going straight to the championship, being in the main event at WrestleMania this coming spring. That's what I'm concerned with, is WWE going to push Gunther to the sky, through the ceiling, and make him this all-be superstar. And everyone's pointing now at Brock Lesnar. Like, that's the only guy he hasn't beaten yet. So I'm like, is that the guy that he forces to tap out? Because if you're going to beat John Cena, you better beat everybody.
Well, I think that's where the fan engagement, I think, is going to come into a degree, because I mean they were showing him. I mean, he was getting hassled even just going to his tour bus afterwards. There were grown men that were following him there, and he was getting hassled. And so now I think the crowds from this point forward are going to be they're probably on the. They're basically on right now for Raw, so I don't know what's going on. You jumped on the mic here, Big G.
Yeah, I watched a little bit of Raw, and Gunther opened it, and oh my goodness, does he have nuclear heat?
That's what I was just going to assume. So I'm glad you confirmed that, because with that reaction and how they were handling him, I think you're going to kind of get what you want here, Tyler, somewhat organically, because now with the amount of heat that he's getting, he's going to become the most natural one to book that way, and then eventually put a babyface over that can be booked against them, and then hopefully get that rub, because that's the weird thing about when a face goes out, especially somebody like John Cena. You got to put a heel over on the way out. That's the more natural progression, and then that heel uses that heat to put the face over. But now we're doing like wrestling the philosophy here with a guy that's got very good hockey expertise. But I did want to have that discussion with you, because you clearly were watching that. Even with your son, it looked like was he watching?
Oh no, he went to bed. He's got an 8:00 bedtime. But I wanted him to know who John Cena was. So I looked into his best matches. I'm like, I can't just show him a WrestleMania match. That's too easy. I'm like, how about this random Raw match from it was right before Backlash 07. It was after WrestleMania 23. Him and Shawn Michaels. And the funny story of that match was John Cena had been out with Ric Flair the night before that match. So then him and Shawn go on 60 Minutes the next night. Just adds to the lore of John Cena. So I didn't explain to my son why John Cena might have looked a little sluggish in that match, because I think he's too young to understand that. But he was sitting there, and so now he loves to say Shawn Michaels, not John Cena. He loves Shawn Michaels now. So eventually we'll get to the deeper depths of HBK's career when the time comes.
I like that's one of the earlier things that he's saying. You can tell what you're teaching him there. So that's,
as long as he doesn't say what Shawn Michaels and Triple H said this age, I don't need him getting kicked out of daycare yet. So as long as he keeps the DX stuff to a minimum, I think we'll be okay.
Exactly. You got to be careful when you go back into that era, because like you said, you didn't necessarily grow up in that era, but that wasn't as kid friendly. They're going a lot more kid friendly with the content these days. But yeah, interesting discussion. I want to transition to hockey here a little bit, because you got great expertise there, and I think I'm more fascinated by this Red Wings team than maybe some, but I'm seeing some interesting elements. But I'm curious to kind of get your takes on the season so far, because I know people are a little impatient here. I know about the timeline and all of that, but I think they've made some interesting changes from last year to this year, and I feel like between how they've played so far, having the coaching staff actually installed, which we've talked about before, we talked about the transition last year, and now having some of these young guys that are coming in and giving some new blood, and you can see the compound effect. This is what's fun when you get young guys in there, especially, I'm not used to this in hockey, I'm used to this in other sports, but man, those guys are just getting out there and skating, and they're just letting it loose, and that's, I think, helping everybody feel kind of young, even the Van Riemsdykes and Canes of the world. And it's really a compound effect where you can see these guys getting better almost game by game. So then you've got a set of players that should be improving more in an exponential fashion as the year goes on. So I have maybe a more hopeful outlook than some on this team, but I'm curious how you've kind of seen them here so far.
Well, it's just been an up and down season, right? Like, they had the strong start at home, and everyone thought, okay, well, maybe this team is actually good. But then, they kind of came back down to earth, and like everyone's like, all right, here we go again. And the issue was, you mentioned the young guys, but I kind of want to mention the older ones here, because for me, the biggest concern was the goaltending, right? They go out and get John Gibson, who I thought was a little bit of an overbuy because he hasn't really been the number one guy for the last few years. When he's with the Anaheim Ducks, like he lost the number one job to Lucas Dostal last year, and that's what made him available to Steve Yzerman. And I think the Red Wings kind of overpaid him, kind of gave up a little too much to acquire him at last year's draft. But it's funny. I thought, while these young kids, the Emmett Finneys, the Axel Sandin Pelikas, and Simon Edmondson's continue to come along here, and obviously Lucas Raymond's one of the stars on this team for the last couple of years. Like, these guys will lead the crew, but I think the goaltending might hurt them. And since early December or earlier this month, a couple weeks ago, like Talbot's been great. He's been a little more consistent than two, but Gibson's been on fire, right? He played well this past week, played fantastic, posted a couple of shutouts here and there. I mean, the game against Chicago on Sunday, right? You're going up against, I know they didn't have Connor Bedard, but they still have a hungry Hawks team there. He posts another shutout. Now he's got 2 on the year, 2 in his last 3 games. And for a guy that I thought was going to be a liability heading into the season and, question his work ethic and whatnot. And right now the Red Wings were here December 15th, still battling for first place in the Atlantic, right? I as optimistic as some Wings fans were, how many of them are actually thinking, we can challenge for first place? They think they'd be fighting for a wild card spot at this point of the year. And I think that's what's important here. And you mentioned the young guys. I think Emmett Finney was the one that no one expected in September to be a factor for this team. We thought he was going to be in Grand Rapids over here. We'll get him to see him develop a little bit, then maybe get a call-up later in the year, similar to what we've seen with someone like Nate Danielson, another guy who's made an immediate impact over the last couple of weeks since he's been called up from the Griffins. But Finney had a really great camp, and next thing you know, he's on the top line opening night, and his speed, his awareness, and his creativity with the puck, his ability to find guys in open spaces, his ability to finish as well, just an all-around great offensive player. Still some things to work on for sure as a rookie, but if you're asking anything out of a young kid like him, I mean, he's checked all the boxes. And Sandy Pelika, we thought he might be a guy that come down to Grand Rapids as well. He makes the team, and similar to Finney in a way, but obviously being a defenseman, you're asked a lot more. But I think he's filled his role. He's seen a lot of time on the power play. There's just so many tools that this Red Wings team has. And a lot of these tools have been over there for the last couple of years, right? With obviously Larkin, DeBrincat, JT Compher, so on, Mo Seider. But everything has just kind of been working, and it clicks at the right time, and they've beaten teams they shouldn't beat. Granted, they've lost games they probably shouldn't have, but at the same token, they've found ways to win games that in the past few years they'd find a way to lose, right? And I think that shows the maturity of this team, the maturity of this core. Everything from Todd McClellan's message, I think, has really picked up since training camp. And like I said, I mean, we still got a few more months to go before the season's over. We obviously got the Olympic break, which can either stop momentum or give teams a chance to rest. We'll see how that goes. But the Red Wings have put themselves in a spot to be a Stanley Cup playoff contender, which, I know a couple of years ago we missed out on the final day of the season, but, right now the confidence level is high within this team, and the optimism's there in Hockey Town.
I agree. Your last points make me think of 2 different points. So I think we're going to take a quick break and then come back and talk about some of those veteran acquisitions, and then also kind of the patience route versus kind of going all in on a trade, because that's one of the other questions I had for you. But your excerpt there makes me think of the difference in the concepts that I actually mentioned in an earlier interview about the Pistons. So stick with us. We're going to come back here with Tyler Kuehl of the Daily Faceoff. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Tyler Kuehl, the Daily Faceoff, having a good conversation about the Red Wings. Yeah, your comments make me think of kind of a twofold approach here, because that's the other thing I was going to mention when I was talking about the young guys. That's another reason that they didn't have a slow start, but the idea of, okay, you've got veterans coming in that are going to have to adjust. That's how I kind of always felt about Gibson. I thought it was going to take time for him to adjust to playing on this team, and and getting the consistent reps. Then Talbot took a lot of those reps, but I'm glad to see him hitting his stride. JVR kind of was similar. He didn't really have a training camp, and then he's now hit his stride. But you hit on an interesting point, because I was talking with Wes Davenport, who covered the Pistons for us, about the concept that in team building, I think people often underrate the idea of, okay, if you have a team that is enticing to come to, sometimes it's the market, sometimes it's the coach, but oftentimes it's the team success. It might be the brand, it might be the current team roster saying, hey, you've got a good young core, you've got a good team, you're on the verge of really doing something real here, and that will determine often how many assets you have to give up, whether it's through free agency or trades, to get what you need in the building and build your team up. And you talked about that with Gibson. I feel like that's kind of where the Red Wings are at now. Right now, they're kind of in the build-up phase. So to really take a swing, they'd have to kind of overpay, because that was the interesting thing when the Quinn Hughes thing was coming up, because I don't know about you, but I was even getting the feeling from some of the broadcasts that there was starting to be some real thoughts that the Red Wings might end up with him. Even some people in the building, it just seemed like there were some thoughts there. I don't know if that was just, hey, he might be available, we know he's going to be available, and we know this is potentially a good fit. But with the amount that you have to give up for him, that's a very big swing versus, like you said, the assemblance of these pieces coming together. Then you're building that up and not necessarily having to spend, not that he's not a great player, but spend all that on one player. You pool those assets, try to take multiple shots at filling those roles, and then get a more organic build. It's a different approach, and it usually is a longer approach, but sometimes it's more sustained too. But I'm wondering how you felt about that whole process with Hughes getting traded, and then kind of the backlash of, well, because I mean that happens in every sport, but it's the fan base goes, well, I wish we had him, but it's something else to also give up the asset package to get him.
That was going to be the big hurdle, Ryan, for the Red Wings, because Quinn Hughes, he's I don't want to use the word generational talent, but in terms of, I mean, he's probably behind Kuehl McCarr, the second best defender in the National Hockey League. And he was in a spot where, the Vancouver Canucks, they don't really seem like they had much of a future, but they just don't seem like they were in the right direction of where they were a couple of years ago when they won their division and whatnot. And the Red Wings were heavily involved in the conversation. Obviously, Yzerman's not going to let anything slip, but for what the Canucks need, which is more players down the middle and more young talent up front, they were looking. I mean, the Flyers were involved. The Flyers were among the teams that seemed interested. Minnesota, I don't think they necessarily came out of nowhere, but they were not of the front runners. It seemed like it was going to be Detroit or Philadelphia. And you look at, we mentioned Emmett Finney before the break. That was a guy that was possibly involved. Some guys were seeing tongue-in-cheek that there were some really good experienced centermen on this team. I don't know if that meant Dylan Larkin. I don't think it meant Dylan Larkin. Don't take me out of context there, but there were whispers that, there was more of that. That's what the Canucks wanted. Obviously, Lucas Raymond might have been in those discussions as well. I just don't think Yzerman, because he's been very tight to the chest on prospects. I mean, there was a chance for him to get rid of Jonathan Berggren a couple of years ago, right, at the trade deadline when the Wings were, kind of in that playoff push, but he held on to him. And I know, obviously, he's on waivers now and might be coming back to Grand Rapids here. But that said, it seemed like if the deal wasn't perfect for a guy like Quinn Hughes, and is what we saw with Vancouver, they gave up a top 6 centerman. They gave up a top 9 winger. They gave up one of their best young defensemen in Z. William and a draft pick just to get one guy. I mean, if you want to go shot for shot of what the Wings would have had to given up, that might have had to include a Simon Edvinsson or a Mo Sider to get Quinn Hughes. And I just don't think, even Wings fans probably don't want that either. We know how important Sider's been the last few years, and we see the potential that Simon Edvinsson has, and a draft pick too. I mean, that's just a lot for a defenseman that may or may not fit in this mold too. And Also, you have to consider the fact that after next season, 26-27, he's a free agent. Does Quinn Hughes want to re-sign in Detroit? I mean, Minnesota, I don't think they cared whether or not he wants to re-sign. Minnesota wants to win now. Obviously, Yzerman was thinking long-term with that, so if he doesn't feel that he could get Quinn Hughes for a long time, he's not going to give up 4 quality assets. So, yeah, Wings fans have reason to feel bummed that Yzerman didn't take a swing here, but if you look at what Minnesota had to give up to get Quinn Hughes, I think it's understandable why Yzerman held back, because also Minnesota right now, they're a number 3 team in that Central Division, a wild card team, give or take. The Red Wings are near the top of the division, albeit it's a very tight Eastern Conference playoff race across the board. 1 through 10, I think, is divided up by, 5-6 points. It's very close right now. But what's been working is what's in the fold right now, and I think there's a couple guys down here in Grand Rapids. We just saw John Leonard get called up here to Detroit. He's been great for the Griffins. There's guys that can help contribute there as well. So I do think if the Wings want to make the playoffs, they need to go out and make a trade at the deadline. This is the year that Yzerman has to realize, okay, I have to take a swing. The question is, how much can you give up, and what pieces do you think you need? Obviously, we have time between now and the trade deadline in early March. Obviously, he's going to have the entire Olympic break to figure out what he needs. If he decides to make a move before then, that's obviously an option. But I think right now the Wings are in a spot where they're trying to see what they have and evaluate for what they need to make a honest-to-goodness playoff push. Because you can try to, Ryan, you could ride this roster out. I said the last couple of years, the Wings should have made the playoffs the last 2 years, given what's on their roster. But on paper, doesn't necessarily lead to on-ice success, right? So I think you take the next month or so, see where the holes are, what you need to add on to, and then go from there and decide, hear what's out there. And GMs are always talking. They're not like waiting until February 25th to say, all right, we need to make a trade now. They're doing this throughout the year. They're talking to other GMs, seeing what other GMs want to. So it's a long game process to make one of these deals. Some happen overnight, some happen over a 2-month span. So I'm excited and interested to see what Yzerman's willing to do to add to this hockey club.
Well, and I think one of the big things to remember as you were going through that great description is the fact that a lot of those names that you were talking about them giving up and how they're valuable pieces of the Red Wings roster, though a lot of those were picks that Yzerman has made since he got in the fold here to Detroit. So I think he is doing a decent amount with the picks. I know he's picked up his fair share of criticism for not building the team as aggressively or in the way that people want. And obviously you have the playoff drought for a storied franchise. I get all of that. But he is compiling a roster that once they are able to consolidate or do want to take that swing and make that trade, they'll have a lot of pieces, and I think that's important. But it's also good to know, well, hey, we're hitting on a lot of these picks, so we don't necessarily want to be flippant about trading away some of these picks or what have you, because they've brought back a lot of value because of who's doing the selecting too. So that's always something to keep in mind. But I'm curious what you have in mind here, because I agree that I think they're probably going to try to do something. They didn't do anything at the trade deadline last year. That obviously didn't go very well. They ended up missing the playoffs. It created a bit of a kerfuffle in the locker room there. I think that's the official term for it. And you know, they I think will be slightly more aggressive, because I think just turning over to making the playoffs will be a good improvement this year, and then seeing what that young roster and the new additions will do. But do you have any inclination on kind of how aggressive they'll be, or what they go for? I've asked multiple people that, and it seems to kind of all come back to a similar category.
Well, I don't know how similar this is, but you have to look what's happened the last few years near the trade deadline. The Wings have lost, there was the 1 year where they lost 2 bad games to Ottawa right before the deadline, right? And there was talks that they were looking at making a big swing then, but then Yzerman pulled back, saying, all right, this team's not ready yet. And, he's never said it directly, but it seems like this team needs to earn that big swing at the deadline. That's kind of what the unwritten message has been from the front office. And it really is going to depend how this team comes out of the Olympic break, right? If they come out, February 25th, 26th, and they lose 3 games in a row, well, we need a second a second line winger or second line center to add some more offense here, but we're not going to give up 2 draft picks and 2 prospects to get it if we're not good enough. That's what that's what's kind of held him back for the last couple of years. I think last year was more so pretty obvious that this team wasn't ready, but you look at that run in 23-24, if they have maybe a better depth center, a little more depth down the middle, they might win a couple more games down the stretch there, and boom, they're in the playoffs. And we're not having this conversation, right, on this, now 9-year plus playoff drought. Everyone's joking this nice, they still call it a new arena, Little Caesars Arena. The only playoff games that have been in there since that barn's been open have been the Pistons, not the Red Wings, right? So I think it's just going to depend how the team is playing into the Olympic break in February, how it comes out. Because I just don't think Yzerman's going to make a move soon here. He's going to make a move when he feels like its time is right. And maybe I think it's one of those things, too, where, and I said this before, I think Yzerman needs to make a move to show that he has confidence in his team. Even if it's giving up a key young piece or a player that's playing well for them right now. Kind of showing them, hey, I went out and bought this other guy from this other team. I believe that you guys can get the job done. Because I think that bit of confidence, if you can give that to this team and say, hey, I believe in you guys, that's why I made this big trade and got rid of a couple of your friends and one of these draft picks, that's because I feel like we can make a run here. I think that'll give this team more confidence than it has right now, and that might be what pushes this team over the edge and finally gets them into the postseason. And I do think Yzerman wants to, simply get to the playoffs, but also he doesn't want to just be a one round and out, right? Like Montreal, it was fun last year for the Canadians, got to the playoffs for the first time in a few years, but they were out in 5 games. That's not what Yzerman wants. He wants a team that's going to get to the playoffs, make an honest run, maybe win around, and then, go from there, right? Because I think winning playoff series can give more confidence to the longevity of a franchise. I mean, you look at the Toronto Maple Leafs; they've won 2 playoff series in 21 years. So and look at the talent they've had over the last little bit. So I think Yzerman wants to make a move. He wants to find out, but he just got to make sure that the time is right and that it's going to be worthwhile, not just to get to the playoffs, but be successful in the postseason.
I think you made a lot of great points there, especially the idea. I find it especially interesting, the idea of motivating the rest of the team, because that was kind of, I think, part of Larkin's argument last year of, hey, we're out here working and, give us some help to work with. Maybe you do that this year and kind of have a call and response thing there, but it'll be interesting to follow. I think it's been an interesting team so far, and then adding new pieces in would be great to add some juice in there, but we'll be following up with you and maybe even after that and seeing how, what your thoughts are on any new acquisitions. But until then, make sure to tell the people where they can follow you here.
Well, you can follow all of our great writers at Daily Faceoff at dailyfaceoff.com. We got a lot of great stuff. We're gearing up for the Olympics here. I'm doing a lot of women's hockey coverage for the Olympics. We're really excited about the coverage we have coming out next month and a half here, and obviously for all the games in Milan, which for those who have been following the arena story out there, it's been a lot of tire fire going on with that. But you can also follow me on X or Twitter, whatever you still call it, at TJKU29. Lots of great stuff, and excited to see what the Red Wings do. And for those that live in the area, if you don't want to watch the Wings, that's fine. Just come down to Van Andel. The best team, the best start in American Hockey League history is happening over here. The Grand Rapids Griffins have just been tearing it up this year. They've been exciting, and a lot of those guys you're seeing in Grand Rapids will be in Detroit tomorrow, it seems like.
Exactly. Yeah, we've been busy with Red Wings coverage and trying to work out the coverage on the 2 shows here now, but we've got some incoming Griffins coverage here with the Hockeytown West guys, Elaine Shercliffe, and a bunch of folks. So we'll be covering them too. But appreciate you coming on. We'll look forward to your coverage again in the future here.
All right. Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tyler.